The safe house on Bleecker Street was supposed to be impenetrable. That was the whole point of a safe house, a location that officially didn't exist, a location that was known only to a handful of operatives, a location that had never been used before and would never be used again after the operation concluded. Agent Nexus had used approximately 23 different safe houses over the course of his career. Each safe house had been constructed with the kind of security protocols that made them virtually impossible to compromise. But the message that arrived at 14:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon suggested that the entire network of safe houses had been systematically exposed to hostile intelligence services. If every escape route you'd prepared was already known to the people hunting you, where would you go? The message came through a dead drop location, a mailbox at a postal facility in Midtown Manhattan that was supposed to be monitored only by Nexus and his original case officer. The message contained a single piece of information: safe house network compromised, all locations exposed. Do not use any prepared locations. The message was unsigned, but the encryption protocol that protected it indicated it came from someone with high-level access to the intelligence community's classified information. Nexus had approximately 37 hours before the hunters closed in completely. 37 hours to find a location where he could hide that wasn't already on a list somewhere in the intelligence community's database. 37 hours to understand how the entire network of safe houses, a network that had taken 7 years to construct, could have been exposed in what appeared to be a systematic purge. The safe house on Bleecker Street was his current location. It was a modest apartment on the 3rd floor of a nondescript building in Greenwich Village. The apartment had been stocked with supplies, 3 months of food, water, medical equipment, and most importantly, a secure communication device that could connect to encrypted networks without being traced. The apartment had backup power generators. The apartment had a secondary exit that led to the roof and then to adjacent buildings. The apartment had been selected specifically because it was impossible to access without triggering at least 6 different security measures. But if the hunters already knew about the apartment, then all of those security measures were irrelevant. Nexus began the process of securing and destroying his current safe house. 37 hours was enough time to erase evidence of his presence, to remove anything that could be used to determine his next location, to ensure that when the hunters arrived, and they would arrive, they would find nothing except an empty apartment and no indication of where he'd gone. But the larger question that consumed his mind was, how had the safe house network been exposed? The network was compartmentalized. No single operative knew the location of more than 3 safe houses. The locations were rotated constantly. The security protocols were changed every month. The only people who knew about the entire network were Nexus, his case officer, the deputy director of operations, and the director himself. Which meant that one of those 4 people had deliberately exposed the network, which meant that someone in the highest levels of the intelligence community had decided that Nexus needed to be eliminated and had taken the time to methodically destroy every escape route before moving in for the kill. Would you be able to survive if the entire machinery of a powerful government was specifically designed to eliminate you? Nexus abandoned the Bleecker Street apartment at 16:33 p.m. and moved into the urban landscape with the knowledge that every moment counted. He couldn't use any of the prepared safe houses. He couldn't access any of the safe deposit boxes that contained cash and false identities. He couldn't use any of the networks of assets that he'd constructed over his career. Every resource that he'd carefully prepared for exactly this contingency was now a liability because the hunters would be monitoring those resources, waiting for him to access them. He became a ghost in the city. He moved through crowds, avoiding facial recognition cameras by keeping his head down. He purchased supplies with cash that he'd been carrying in his jacket. He used public transportation, paying in cash, never staying on the same line for more than a few stops. He became someone whose existence seemed almost accidental, someone who barely registered in the consciousness of the people around him. By hour 8, Nexus had confirmed something absolutely terrifying. The hunters weren't just looking for him in safe houses. The hunters were looking for him everywhere. Facial recognition hits were appearing in his tracking protocols. Cameras at subway stations, cameras at bus terminals, cameras at airport security checkpoints. The entire surveillance infrastructure of New York City had been activated to find him. The entire machinery of government was mobilizing to eliminate him. He made contact with the only person he thought might still be trustworthy, Dr. Elizabeth Cross, a former intelligence analyst who'd left the agency to work as an independent consultant. Cross had been one of the few people in Nexus's life who'd maintained her integrity while working in the intelligence community. Cross left the agency specifically because she couldn't stomach the systematic corruption that had consumed the organization. The Safe House network has been exposed. I have 37 hours before the hunters close in completely. I need information. I need to understand who exposed the network. Cross was silent for a long moment. Then she said something that made Nexus understand the scope of the danger he was in. I've been monitoring intelligence community communications. There's a purge happening right now. Operatives are being brought in for questioning. Safe houses are being raided. I think someone in the upper levels of the intelligence community has decided that Nexus needed to be eliminated and had taken the time to methodically destroy every escape route before moving in for the kill. Agency has decided that you're a liability that needs to be removed before you can expose something. Expose what? Nexus asked. I don't know exactly, Cross replied, but I think it has to do with operations you were involved with 3 years ago. Operations that have been causing problems for people in power. I think you stumbled onto something, Nexus. I think you discovered something that powerful people want to keep hidden. Nexus tried to think back to operations he'd executed 3 years ago. Nothing stood out. Nothing seemed significant enough to trigger a systematic purge of the entire Safe House network. But that was the problem with working in intelligence. Often you didn't understand the significance of what you were doing until years later, after the consequences had already cascaded through the system. By hour 24, Nexus was operating on no sleep, moving through subway tunnels and abandoned buildings, living in a state of absolute paranoia that might actually be justified for once. He'd been recorded on surveillance cameras at least 17 times. He'd been nearly apprehended twice. He'd narrowly escaped pursuit in the financial district and again in Upper Manhattan. The hunters were getting closer. The net was tightening. The margin for error was disappearing. Nexus realized something at hour 30 that changed everything. He wasn't just running from the hunters. He was running toward them. Every evasion tactic he used, every escape route he took, was being anticipated and analyzed. The hunters weren't just chasing him. The hunters were herding him, guiding him toward a specific location where the final elimination could occur with minimal risk to the operational team. He was being systematized. He was being turned into a chess piece on a board where his movements had already been calculated and predetermined. If you realized that your every attempt to escape was actually leading you directly toward the trap, what would you do? Nexus made the decision that would define the remainder of his life. Instead of continuing to run, instead of continuing to allow himself to be herded toward the predetermined endpoint, he was going to stop running. He was going to contact the hunters directly. He was going to surrender on his own terms, in a location of his choosing, with the intelligence community's protocols already activated as a protection against assassination. He called the FBI's field office in Manhattan and informed them that he was a federal fugitive who was willing to surrender. The FBI responded with absolute speed, moving tactical teams into position, securing a location, preparing to take custody of someone that the agency wanted eliminated. When the FBI arrested Nexus at hour 34, they were simultaneously receiving communications from Deputy Director Webb, indicating that Nexus was a critical witness in an ongoing investigation into intelligence community corruption. Webb had been monitoring the purge. Webb had understood that Nexus was being targeted for elimination. Webb had positioned the FBI to intercept Nexus before the agency could execute him. The arrest saved his life. Nexus spent the next several months being debriefed by a joint task force that included FBI agents, congressional investigators, and intelligence community officials who were still loyal to the concept of institutional accountability. He provided detailed information about the operations he'd executed 3 years ago. He identified the targets that had been deemed threats. He identified the officials who'd ordered the operations. He identified the entire machinery of how the intelligence community had transformed from an institution that served national security into an institution that served the personal interests of powerful political figures and multinational corporations. The exposure of the Safehouse purge triggered the most significant investigation into intelligence community corruption in the past 2 decades. Approximately 100 operatives were questioned. Approximately 40 were identified as being involved in the systematic purge. The entire structure of the intelligence community was forced to undergo a comprehensive security review. But the victory felt incomplete because Nexus understood that the machinery of corruption was self-perpetuating. The machinery would adapt. The machinery would construct new safehouses, new networks, new methods of elimination. The machinery of institutional evil was essentially immortal, capable only of being temporarily disrupted, never actually destroyed. He was offered witness protection. He was offered a new identity. He was offered the opportunity to disappear completely and begin a new life in a location where the intelligence community could never find him. He declined. Instead, he chose to work with Dr. Elizabeth Cross to document the operations, to write about what he'd experienced, to ensure that the truth about the intelligence community's systematic corruption would reach the American public. Because Nexus understood that the only real defense against the machinery of institutional evil was transparency. The only real protection against being hunted was making sure that too many people knew about you, that too many people understood what you'd discovered, that the machinery of elimination would be forced to operate in public view, where their actions could be questioned and investigated. The Safehouse protocol had been shattered, but the truth had survived. And that was enough.